What is up guys, Blue Spooky here with another 2-hour Megamix for you. If you guys are enjoying these longer 2-hour videos and the daily uploads, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you end up enjoying the video. If we could get to around 1,500 likes on these 2-hour videos, I think that's a good milestone to aim for. It really helps out the channel and ensures I can continue making these for a long time to come. If you guys have any thoughts about the stories in the video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as my favorite part about doing these is reading your guys' thoughts on the stories therein. Without further ado guys, I will let you enjoy the next 2 hours of true scary stories, and I will see you again at the end of the video. Have a great day. Okay, so this was a long time ago, when I was quite young. I'm 21 now, and I must have been around 11 or so at the time this event took place. It was so traumatizing that I actually thought it was a nightmare I had as a kid. That is, until I recently found out it actually happened to me. My mom told me a bit more details on this story, and I thought it would be a cool one to share. Here goes. This took place about 10 years ago in the UK. One of my older cousins, I'll call him James for privacy reasons, had just passed his driving test. He was maybe about 18 at the time. James and his family were quite well off, so he had this big black pickup truck that was open at the back. Now, he's always been a bit on the daring side. So when he got told by a few of his mates that people had reportedly seen an odd woman in a cream nightgown wandering the country roads late at night, of course James wanted to go out and look for her, thinking how funny it would be if we actually found her. Bear in mind, this was not the kind of place anyone would typically walk, as there was nothing along these back roads. No pathways, no houses, no barns, nothing. Just empty country lanes, surrounded by trees, fields, and bushes. There was nothing for miles on end. This woman was said to be walking along these empty roads, and she would be all by herself, not even walking a dog or anything. Just spotted alone, really late at night. James said he was going to go look for her, and he asked who wanted to come along. Me being stupid and thinking I was real tough, I said yeah. So did one of my other cousins. We'll call her Sarah. She was about 6 months older than me, so we were pretty similar in age. My mom didn't like the thought of me going, so she came too. She's the sort of person that's very young at heart, so she was down for anything. Anyways, all 4 of us piled into James's pickup truck. He was driving, my mom was riding shotgun, and Sarah and I sat in the open part at the back of the pickup. I'd say we were out on the back roads for about 30 minutes before we came onto the road that she was meant to be on. All of a sudden, James started shouting. I can't remember what he said exactly, but I imagine it had something to do with the woman, as we did end up finding her. Sarah and I stayed really quiet while James drove past and stopped his truck. The woman almost looked drunk. She was messy and dirty and was walking quite strangely. James and my mom were looking at the windows, whispering to one another, probably wondering what the hell this woman was doing out here at this time. Sarah and I were still kind of hidden, peering over the side and looking at this woman. She was staggering towards us, when out of nowhere, she started full-on sprinting toward the truck. Sarah and I started screaming and shouting, then crying out of pure terror. James then floored it down the road to get us out of there. All 4 of us were in complete shock. I didn't say anything on the way back. I don't really remember much after that either. Never really found out what happened to that woman. I haven't seen James in a very long time, but I probably will soon, so I'm going to ask him more about it. I'm sure he'll know. I'll be able to give you an update with more details. I dread to think about what would have happened if she had actually caught up to the truck. My parents were supportive of my decision not to go to college, but they made it clear that I'd be expected to begin working directly after high school. I would have preferred to have a little time off, but I knew I was pressing my luck. Just 2 weeks after graduation, I began my first job at McDonald's. It wasn't the job I'd hoped for, but it was a job nonetheless. I stayed there just long enough to find a full-time position as a line cook at a fairly small restaurant. The business was close enough for me to walk, and the people who owned it were very cool. The pay wasn't much more than McDonald's, but I did have insurance with them, a perk that would benefit me if I broke my arm riding my bike or something. After I left there, I bounced around for several years until I came upon a great position at one of the large chain restaurants around here. The job came with a lot more responsibilities and paid much better. In a lot of ways, it was a world I was unprepared for. This was where I'd find out that I was capable of doing the right thing, even if my job was at stake. At this point in my career, I'd become fairly accustomed to the way things happen in the food industry. In a lot of ways, a restaurant is like a family. The employees spend a lot of time together even when they're not on the clock, and they come in on their days off to socialize and sometimes even date one another. The managers are effectively the parents of the family. They do all they can to keep their underlings happy even at the cost of propriety. I've worked at places where the bosses would regularly buy alcohol for their minor employees and party with them. As you can imagine, things get weird on occasion. That had always been off the clock, though. This new place I was working at took things even further than I was used to. Just my first day there, I was shocked to see how close the male managers seemed to be with the employees, especially the female ones. I'd only been on the clock for a few hours when I came out of the kitchen to discuss something with the manager. He was standing in the bar area, talking to a couple of the wait staff. Sitting in front of him was a hostess. I looked up from my paperwork to see him giving this 17-year-old hostess a very sensual shoulder massage. This was out in the open, mind you, in a restaurant full of customers. I was shocked. I asked my question and he continued doing it. He'd obviously been doing this sort of thing for a long time and had become very comfortable doing it, as had the other employees. Although I didn't approve, I kept my opinion to myself. My first day wasn't exactly the right time to rock the boat, you know? Besides, the girl didn't appear to mind too much, despite it being very creepy. I let it go and went on with my work. Sooner or later, I knew a time would come where that sort of thing would bite him in the butt, but that time came a lot sooner than I'd expected. From there on, a few months went by. I learned my job for the most part and was really enjoying it. As sous chef, part of my job was to handle the supply orders for the kitchen and the rest of the back of house. One evening, after the dinner rush, I was preparing the order while the rest of the cooks shut the line down. Once again, I had a question, so I made my way to find the same manager. I checked the dining area for him, but was told he was in his office. I headed back into the rear of the building where the offices were located. The door was cracked open. This always meant it was okay to come in, so I didn't bother knocking. When I entered, the manager had one of the servers trapped in a corner and had his hand placed on her chest. I wasn't sure exactly what was going on, but the girl looked very distressed. I cleared my throat to get his attention. The manager turned around quickly and had a very shocked look on his face. With his focus now elsewhere, the girl took the opportunity to run away. She hurried out of the room. I could see she'd been crying. I knew I'd just seen something I wasn't supposed to, but I pretended that I hadn't. He gave me this sort of questioning look and asked what I wanted. I told him, and he gave me the shortest answer possible. The tension was hanging in the room, and I could feel myself beginning to choke on it. I thanked him and rushed out. Just as the girl had, I avoided him for the rest of the night. It gave me a sick feeling as it ate away at me. I couldn't handle it anymore. I told my girlfriend what I'd seen, and she helped me to process what I'd witnessed. My conscience told me I needed to inform corporate, although the girl involved was an adult. The company as well as I would be included in any lawsuit, should one be filed. Before that, though, I figured I should hear the story from both people. Was there any chance I'd misread the situation? I wanted to know. The next morning, I called the girl that had been involved and asked what happened. She was understandably reluctant to talk about it, but she made it clear it was not consensual. I asked if she was pressing charges, and she told me she just wanted to forget about it. I assured her I had no problem backing her up if she changed her mind. She thanked me, but her silence made the problem that much worse. I didn't want to drag her into something she didn't want to be a part of, but I also didn't think I could keep quiet either. It was clear my manager was a predator, and probably not doing it to just her. Staying quiet could also get me fired. I decided I'd wait to speak to him first. A few nights later, I went into the office and confronted him. At first, he tried to deny it. That was until I told him I'd spoken to the girl. He admitted he'd done it, but made it out to be a mutual situation. Something told me he was lying, so I continued to press him. He began to tell me how well I'd been doing, and even offered me a promotion. I declined. I wanted to find a way to resolve this situation. I had no idea what the solution could be, but he promised that he'd figure it out and get back to me. I came back to work that Monday hoping to find things would have been fixed. Instead, they had only gotten worse. I was preparing for the dinner rush when a member of the wait staff brought me the bad news. The server he'd assaulted had been fired the night after I'd spoken with him. The server who told me this said the fired server was crying and mentioned me, quote, shooting off my big mouth. This made me livid. I approached the manager about it, and he pulled me into the office and closed the door. Before I could say anything, he reminded me that he was the boss, and he was in charge of who was hired and fired. If I didn't want to join her, I would get my attitude in check. I was too shocked to reply. I walked out of the office and closed the door behind me. It took a moment to regain my composure, but when I did, my mind was pretty clear. I told my girlfriend what I'd decided. The following morning, I made myself a pot of coffee and called up the district manager. He sounded angry, but thanked me for informing him about the situation. I hung up and waited for the fallout. There was no news until I got to work at around 4:30 or so. I knew there may be some conflict from my boss, and I prepared accordingly. To my surprise, the assistant manager was there instead. He didn't say anything to me, but I could tell by everyone's demeanor that something major had happened. After closing, the assistant manager got us all together and announced the manager had quote-unquote moved on. There was no mention of why, of course, just that he was sad to have to leave on such short notice and apologized for being unable to say goodbye. It was all the usual corporate spin. Nobody but myself and the assistant manager knew what was going on at the time. When the truth did eventually come out, I was shocked by the way I was treated. I won't pretend I didn't expect a little pushback, but I was unprepared for the overwhelming amount of hate I got, even after I explained everything I'd seen and heard. Most of the employees showed nothing but disgust for me. I'll be honest, I felt the same way about them. The idea anyone would stand up for a predator was unimaginable to me, not to mention the most stringent of defenders were all female and called themselves friends of the victim. After a while, all the hate became too much for me. I took another job downtown. Never got the full story of what happened to the manager. All I know for sure is that he lost his job. Not exactly the result I'd had in mind, but I don't regret my decision for 1 second. This is something weird and kind of creepy that happened to me just a couple of weeks ago. It was a Thursday night, and I had just gotten done with some shopping. I went to a couple of stores to get some groceries and some other things after work. By the time I left to go home, it was around 9 p.m. or so. I drove on the highway for a few miles and then exited onto a quieter road. While I was on this road, I was just driving like usual when out of nowhere, the car behind me began honking profusely. I looked back and just saw headlights in the dark and what appeared to be a regular old sedan. At first, I wondered if they were even honking at me. There were no other cars around though, so it had to be. It was really weird because I couldn't think of any reason why they would be honking at me. I was just driving down the road at a normal speed. In fact, I checked my speedometer and it said I was going 58 in a 55. I was driving around the speed limit. Did they think I was going too slow or something? I knew for a fact I hadn't cut them off or anything. Maybe whoever was driving just accidentally hit the horn. I've done that myself a few times before. About a minute went by, and they honked at me again. Now I was even more confused than before. They were driving behind me, sort of close but not right on my bumper. A few seconds later, they honked once more. I started to pull over to the side of the road to let them pass me by, but as I did, the car behind me did the exact same thing. Was it somebody that knew me? I couldn't tell who was driving, and I certainly didn't recognize the car. Clearly, they were not passing me though. They wanted to stay behind me for some reason. They honked again, as we were now going less than 40 miles per hour, nearing the side of the road. I went back onto the road and sped back up again, and they did the same. I really didn't know what this person was doing. The only thing I could think to do was just keep driving home. By this point, it was only a couple of minutes away. The car behind me returned to honking several more times before I made it to my street. When I turned onto the street where my house was, the car continued following me. This made me kind of nervous. I still didn't know what was going on. When I got to my house, I pulled into the driveway. The car followed me and pulled in right behind me. Now I was worried. I still couldn't tell who was driving the vehicle. It was so dark out. I stayed inside my car and did not want to get out. The person back there could be dangerous or something. I thought they were going to get out of their vehicle. I wasn't really sure what to do if they did. Maybe they would explain why they had been honking at me. Possibly there was a logical explanation. Maybe my tire was going flat or something, and they wanted to make sure I got home safely. I knew that certainly wasn't the case though. I was just being hopeful. A few minutes went by, and I remained in my vehicle. Surprisingly, so did the other person. After 5 minutes of this stalemate, all of a sudden the car backed up quickly and made it out to the street. They then drove away at a hurried speed. I got out of my vehicle and looked around. None of my tires were flat or anything. My car seemed completely fine. I went inside, so confused about the situation. Since then, I haven't seen that car again. I still wonder though, who was it and what did they want? Why did they just leave without doing anything? Have you guys ever heard of Clubhouse? It's a fairly new social media site that's pretty hot at the moment. Clubhouse is essentially an audio version of Twitter. You can enter various chat rooms with different discussion themes, and you can chat or just listen in on topical conversations. I tried it out for the first time not too long ago, after one of my friends was raving about it. I didn't expect to be that interested in it, to be honest. I did not have high hopes. I did, however, think it might be a good tool for businesses to listen in on business-like conversations or offer a bit of interesting insight. I wasn't very familiar with social networking sites myself. I've only ever used Twitter and a very tiny amount of Facebook. Once I started using Clubhouse, though, I found the experience to be rather fun. Conversations took place in real time, and it was very free-flowing. One thing I really liked was the fact that recording was prohibited, so everything felt fresh. There were no repeats, and it was cool to hear what famous people were talking about in their rooms. It gave you a kind of behind-the-scenes passage into their personal lives. Before I knew it, I was completely hooked. I was in and out of different chat rooms all night long, listening in. Sometimes I would even speak my mind. I have to say more often than not, though, I was just a listener. I spent most of my time hopping from room to room, and ended up discovering some pretty niche topics, unpopular rooms, and even some mysterious content. For example, I remember this one I found where nobody was talking at all. All you could hear was the sound of someone tapping away at a keyboard. It seemed to be a room where people were logged in working together in silence. Maybe something to do with telework that was on the rise at the time, or perhaps something else was going on. Either way, it was pretty weird. There was another room where someone would just repeatedly chant Buddhist sutras. I started off feeling a sense of wonder as I listened in, then quickly became overcome with a sense of sleepiness. I had to leave. I also entered some overseas rooms and listened to conversations in English without understanding much at all of what they were saying. It was just fun to listen in. There were many times I lost track of time and ended up staying up very late, hopping from room to room listening in. One night I entered a room that was created by someone called Mr. Z. You couldn't tell the gender from the profile pic. It was just a completely black icon. My best guess was it was someone from abroad. I thought I would hop in and see what they were talking about. I joined the room. At first, I thought it was one of those silent rooms again. Then I realized I could hear a faint voice. Someone speaking. A man and a woman. Their voices were so faint that I couldn't make out what they were saying, let alone what language they were using. It sounded like someone had left the chat room open on a desk or something. Even though I couldn't make out what they were saying, I could understand the tone of it. It was increasingly becoming something hostile. Are these two live streaming an argument? I wondered. It certainly sounded like a lover's quarrel or something to me. I wondered what would happen next. I kept listening to this room. I listened in for a while longer. I was getting bored though. I went to change rooms, but just before I did so, I heard the woman of the argument scream. It was so loud that I instinctively removed my headphones. The scream basically pierced my eardrums. What the heck was going on? I turned the volume down a little and put my headphones back on. By the time I could hear again, the screaming had not stopped at all. At the same time, though, there was a dull thudding noise. It sounded to me like someone hitting something very hard. After that, the woman's scream stopped altogether. The only sound I could hear was the sound of a male voice, panting very heavily. Next came the sound of him walking around the room and rummaging around for something. Sounded like he was rooting through a cutlery drawer or a toolbox, perhaps. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I couldn't stop myself from listening. Then there came a strange clicking, grinding sound. I realized after a few moments what that sound might be. It sounded like someone sawing something. I gasped as my mind put together a picture based on all the noises I was hearing. A very disturbing picture. I had to ask myself, was I listening to the sounds of someone being murdered and then dismembered? I suddenly felt nauseous. I took my headphones off again and ran to the bathroom. When I came back, I went to check my phone. I was expecting some amateur director or actor to come on and explain that what I'd just heard was some special effects works or something they were working on for an art project. All I saw when I looked at my phone was a notification that they had closed the room, essentially ending the live stream. Obviously, I have no way to confirm if what I heard was an actual crime. It could have been something fake made up to scare people. Well, if that's the case, it certainly worked on me. One thing I will say is that I searched for that account and the room again. Not sure why. Out of morbid curiosity, maybe. More likely out of a desire to prove what I'd heard was fake. Whenever I searched for that account, though, it always turned up 0 results, and I never saw that chat room again. If it was a prank, it was a very one-time thing to a very small amount of listeners. To me, that just doesn't seem worthwhile. I was left with that disturbing mystery. Although I really enjoyed that app, that experience put me off of ever using it again. I felt very aware of the fact that the internet is full of strangers, and you never know what you might find. It was like I just lifted up a beautiful rock and saw what lived underneath it, a ring of squirming things that operate in the dark. I'm very wary about what I do online now. I got transferred to a rural area of Kanto with work. It wasn't the worst timing in my life, to be honest, because my child was about to start kindergarten, so it felt like the move wouldn't disrupt our lives too much. We enrolled our child into a kindergarten there, and over a short space of time, we were introduced to a few of the parents. I was surprised when I recognized one of the faces in the crowd. It was someone I went to high school with, who will herein be referred to as A. It was a surprising coincidence, to be sure. The truth of the matter was that A and I were not very close at all. We were just in the same classes at school. I'm sure you can understand what I'm saying. Just for clarification, I'm a man and A is a woman. Bear that in mind for this next part of the story. One weekend earlier in this year, I got a knock on my door as I was having a lovely dinner with my wife. At the time, we weren't expecting any company that night. We went to the door and looked through the peephole and saw a strange man standing outside. I opened the door expecting it to be a neighbor needing something or stopping by, but it was not. "Hey, I'm A's husband. You know why I'm here, don't you?" I didn't know what to say to this guy. Of course, I had no idea why he was there. My only thoughts were about getting back to my dinner. He said some other stuff that I really didn't understand or care about. I very quickly became impatient with him and his conversation, so I cut him off mid-sentence. "Look, dude, do you need something?" As soon as I asked that, I knew I had pushed him to the edge. "Yeah, I'd expect that kind of attitude from a guy like you. Yeah, you're the kind of guy who thinks it's fine to put your hands all over someone else's wife, huh?" He was close to yelling. I could tell he had come here to cause a scene and try to embarrass me. I just stood there in shock. I had no idea what he was talking about. Oh great, I just met the local lunatic, I thought to myself. I heard my wife padding down the hall toward the front door to join us and see what was going on. She must have heard the commotion going on. The guy at the door thrust a piece of paper at both of us and ordered us to read it. I could tell from the first glance that it was a printout of some kind. The printout turned to be from his wife. It was her blog postings, apparently. As far as I was concerned, she was just an acquaintance of mine from my old school days. I looked through these printouts, trying to make heads or tails of what this man was accusing me of. What I read utterly shocked me. I found out the printout was a catalog of lies. His wife had imagined a relationship between she and I. It was as if she had written down all her fantasies. I need to tell you a bit about what I saw in those pages, so I'll list out a few things she said. I was reunited with him today. I had such a crush on him in high school. Apparently he moved here through work. What a wonderful coincidence, huh? I know where he works and what window he sits by. It's so good to have him so close by again. You know, when his wife stepped away for a few moments at kindergarten, he asked me to give him my email address. And I did. It was such a thrill. From that day on, I received emails from him every day. He even took me out to dinner and asked me to keep it a secret from his wife. I get on well with his wife kind of, but I like him too much to stop all the fun. I just went along with his lies. I did as he asked. I can't believe he sends me such dirty emails while keeping a straight face when I see him and his wife at the kindergarten. He even told me he would take some paid time off. and asked if I wanted to go on a drive with him to a secluded area, if you know what I mean. I did want to go with him, so we met up and it continued to go on and on like that. She listed many personal details about me as well, which I hadn't shared with anyone, either online or in person. I had no clue as to how she found out about them. Needless to say, I did not check into a hotel with her and did not do any sexual activities either. I didn't send her any erotic messages and I didn't even ask her for her email address. It was all lies. Her husband was not interested in hearing my side of the story though. He just said things like, well, if it's not you, then who else moved to our area she went to school with? Who has the same name as you? Who works where you work? Apparently, these rumors had been spreading for a while. It didn't feel great to know we were being pointed at and spoken about behind our backs. The friends we thought we had made were all thinking I was cheating on my wife, and I was not at all. I found out after the fact A's blog post began to include plans for her and I to run away and elope together. In her words, we'd promised each other we would abandon our current families. This all came to a head when a friend of theirs had contacted her husband to let him know about her blog posts. The husband apparently didn't even know she kept a blog. He became furious when he discovered what she had been writing and confronted her. She doubled down with her delusion. He said she cried as she told him about it. I can only assume those were tears of embarrassment but not guilt of cheating. She was innocent of that, no matter what her fantasies said. Those tears and her inability to tell the truth led the angry husband to my door. He was just there to yell at me. It looked like he wanted to go further than that. I showed him my phone and my emails, but it made no difference to this guy. He just didn't want to see what he didn't want to see. Said I could have deleted all the emails and calls, I could be using different accounts, etc. He was adamant I had really done all those things on his wife's blog. It wasn't until my wife stepped in that he was willing to listen to the voice of reason. After her reasoning with him, he packed away his little printouts from his wife's bogus blog and left. I was confident I was going to be proven innocent, and I had no fear at all. I received an invitation from A and her husband to meet up at a family restaurant to discuss the issue further. I guess some people might find it a bit weird of me and my wife to agree to meet with them, but let me just say, when you've been accused of something you know you're innocent of, and you feel all the eyes of the community have been placed on you, you would be eager to clear your name. We headed to the restaurant. It was a neutral setting with many witnesses. I saw the husband there with all his printouts once more. He wasn't alone, though. There sat next to him was the cause of all my problems, A from high school. My wife and I didn't come empty-handed, though. We had receipts, cell phone records, credit card statements, timesheets, and business trip information, the whole 9 yards, and none of it matched her blog posts. I had an alibi for every occasion. As if a light went on in the husband's mind, he turned to A. If you're not talking about this guy, then who the hell are you cheating on me with? I was convinced A was about to say something like, I just made the whole thing up because I was bored or something. We expected her to say she'd made it up. Instead, she gave her husband the name of some other guy I didn't know. I asked her who he was and why she was saying it was me. I noticed there was a silence on their side of the table. The name she spoke had significance. I looked at her husband and he looked pale. Are you talking about my brother? Yeah, surprisingly, she was having an affair with her husband's brother, and she decided that she would pin all the blame on me and get her husband to attack me. We started to scream and shout about the reasons for her affair with his brother. I went ahead and asked some further questions that had been on my mind since her husband came to my door. Well, why the hell did you involve me at all? Why did you make up all that stuff about me? Do you have any idea how much damage you've caused? All she did was wail like a scalded toddler. I knew I would never get a straight answer. She eventually blurted something close to the fact that she wasn't happy about her brother-in-law's age difference and social status, and apparently she really liked me too. She didn't feel any embarrassment at all admitting all of this. As I walked out the restaurant door fuming in anger, the husband approached me and apologized. He made a big show of it too. He didn't really need to do that. The following day, a care package was delivered to our door. Contained some expensive sake and stuff. A's daughter was absent from kindergarten and eventually left the school altogether. They then moved away shortly after. I always wondered about where they ended up and what happened to them. I live a little bit out in the country. Most of the roads near where I live are very quiet and surrounded by woods or farmland. There's a highway that goes out into more civilization, but other than that, I mostly travel on these quiet roads. One time, I was driving back home a little bit after midnight. I'm usually not out that late, but I believe it was a Friday or Saturday night, and I didn't have work the following day. I had given a friend a ride home from a local bar. Just to show how rural things are out here, the local bar was almost 10 minutes away from my house. I had already dropped off my friend at his place and was on my way back to mine. I was traveling west on a road that was not far from where I lived. I had maybe 5 or so minutes left before getting home. As I drove down this road, I suddenly heard the sound of something impacting my car. I couldn't tell what it was or what had just happened, but the impact was very significant. It was so weird. I slowed down and pulled the car over. I looked around, but it was really dark. Mostly woods were surrounding me on both sides. After I stopped, I got out of my vehicle and started to examine it. It almost sounded like a rock had hit the back side of my car, but I hadn't seen anything. I walked around, and when I got to the rear of the passenger side, I saw a dent in it. It was a little bit above the wheel, and it did appear as though it was possibly a rock that had hit my vehicle. Where did it come from, though? Just as I was thinking about that, I looked up about 100 feet back. I could see there was a figure standing in the road. It looked like a man had just emerged from the woods. As soon as I saw him standing there, he threw something at me. The guy had a really good arm, if I'm being honest. A rock flew right towards me and just barely missed my head by a few feet to the left. It flew off into the woods. Now I knew what had hit my car. The only question left was why. I wasn't going to stick around and wait, though, for this guy to continue pelting me with rocks. I ran to my car and to the driver's side and jumped in. As I was getting into the driver's side door, I noticed the man was now sprinting toward me. He was running, and I put the car into drive. I sped out of there. The man had made it to within 20 feet of me when I left. He attempted to throw another rock as I fled, but luckily I managed to escape without any further damage. I don't know what he planned on doing to me. I got home and called the cops. After that, I haven't experienced a similar situation. It's just so bizarre to me. I don't know why anybody would ever do that. I also don't know why anyone would be out there on foot in the first place. It was a very rural stretch of woods on both sides of the road. I'm hoping that guy doesn't try doing that to anyone else, because they might get seriously injured. This was the early part of the 2000s. I was working as a cook at a Pizza Hut during the evening and taking classes during the day at a community college. On an unusually slow Friday night, a delivery driver and I were told to go home early. He and I had hung out together before and figured this was a great opportunity to do so yet again. We both went home to clean up a bit, then met back up at the store about an hour later. From there, we walked a few blocks to downtown. Our first stop was my favorite restaurant for dinner and a few drinks. It was 10 p.m. when we were seated. After a massive dinner and a few beers, we left and headed to a small bar just around the corner. This was the pattern for the rest of the night. hopping from bar to bar in search for some entertainment and a pretty girl or two to take home with us. Everything had been going well until we came upon a small club at the end of an alley. Dancing wasn't something that interested either of us, but all the pretty girls in their dresses kind of did. In this story, I'll refer to my coworker as Luke. Luke was an outgoing and fun guy to drink with. At work, he was very professional and willing to help out without ever having to be asked. Just as we were about to head inside, Luke stopped me and pointed at a group of people a few yards away. I could see 3 girls talking to a dirty, unshaven-looking man. Luke walked toward the group and I followed. We approached and Luke asked the girls if the man was bothering them. They looked reluctant to speak, so Luke took the initiative. He walked up to the guy, stuck his index finger in his face and yelled at him, calling him all sorts of names, then told him to leave people alone and just go away. The man quietly mumbled and sort of cowered away into the darkness. I never expected to see him again. Luke took this opportunity to chat the girls up. They thanked us for getting the bum, their words, not mine, to go away and introduce themselves. I stood back and watched with equal amounts of jealousy and admiration. His confidence amazed me. Before I knew it, we were walking inside the club with the girls. I joined them at a table, while Luke went to the bar to order a few drinks. He returned a few minutes later with a pitcher of beer and 5 mugs. Everyone took turns pouring themselves a glass. Luke continued getting to know the girls. According to them, they had been stopped out front when the homeless man approached them and asked them for money. They denied having any, and the man continued to harass them. That's when Luke and I showed up. As the night moved on, everything looked to be going well for both of us. I had moved over to a separate table with one of the girls, and we were talking about our classes and majors. Luke was at the first table, still talking to the other 2. When last call finally came, the girls slipped off to the restroom. Luke said they wanted to keep the night going, and had agreed to come back to his place for some more drinks. I hoped that meant we were going to get lucky. We stood around for about 15 minutes before we realized they weren't coming back. I was understandably disappointed, but Luke was absolutely enraged. He was spitting and cursing through clenched teeth. Now this was a side of him I had never seen before. I tried to calm him down, but nothing seemed to work. I slipped him a $20 bill in hopes this would soothe his ego, but he refused to take it. I assumed he was just going to have to sleep it off. We left the club and I pulled out my phone to call for a cab. At the very least, we'd save a little bit of money by sharing one, and maybe even laugh a little bit about our misfortunes during the ride home. I made the call and then turned to Luke to let him know the cab was on its way. He was already gone, though. I thought maybe he'd gone in search of the girls. In his state, I was worried he might take things too far. I looked around for him as fast as I could. I pushed my way through the crowd in a frantic search for this guy. Suddenly, I caught sight of him off in the distance, having a very animated conversation with the homeless man from earlier. I ran in that direction as fast as I could. As I got closer, I could hear him screaming at the men, yelling all sorts of nasty things. The man looked terrified. I was about 10 yards away when Luke hit him. I reached him and tried to pull him back, but he threw me aside and began beating the man. From my place on the ground, I could hardly attempt to draw his attention away from the man. He kept up his vicious attack. The homeless man was curled into a little ball on the ground, while Luke kicked him repeatedly in the head and chest. It all became too much for me. I got back up to my feet and just ran away. The thuds echoed behind me as I fled. The shame I felt at that time will never go away from me. The cab was already waiting for me when I turned the corner. I jumped in and barked at the driver to go, and cried quietly to myself all the way home. It's not a story I enjoy telling, but it needs to be said. My weekend was spent locked up inside my apartment, terrified the cops were going to show up at any moment and associate me with the attack on the homeless man. I purposefully avoided any news or social media and ignored all incoming phone calls. I even considered turning myself in for a few hours when Monday came around. I knew I'd eventually have to face Luke as well. Had I not been so strapped for cash, I may have even quit. That's how far I was willing to go to not have to see him again. At work, I kept my head down and just did my job. Luke and I happened to be the closers that night, so I waited until it was just the two of us. I mentioned the incident to him, and he claimed to have no memory of it at all. I didn't know whether to be angry or laugh. There was no way he was blacked out. I thought he may have been messing with me, but when I brought it up again, he gave a look of complete confusion. I closed up the shop as usual that night and did my best to move on. Luke and I continued to work together on a regular basis, and I kept a friendly facade, but deep down he made my skin crawl. I didn't want him to be near me. Just a few weeks after that night, he invited me to join him and another guy from work to go out again. I declined and made up some weird excuse. I think he got the message though, because he never asked again. Thankfully, that year ended rather quickly, and my time at school was over. I transferred to a larger university across the state and never saw Luke again. Even as I write this, I have no idea what became of the poor man. I might never know, and I'm afraid to find out what I might find if I actually go looking or snooping for information. If he could do that to that guy, what could he do to me? To be honest though, I don't really care anymore. I'm willing to spend the rest of my life in prison if it means I can rid myself of the sense of shame. I'm too much of a coward to find out what happened in the end, but the weight I've been carrying is driving me crazy. Running away that night is the biggest regret of my life. It's a curse I'd never wish upon anyone, not even someone as cruel and evil as Luke. So the story occurred the day after Father's Day of 2022. After putting off writing it for quite some time, I decided to sit down and finish my incomplete draft and share this experience with you all. This may not be the most terrifying story of all time, but it was definitely an unsettling encounter for sure. My sister, who's a few years older than I, is known to go out with her friends. She tends to stay out pretty late. We're talking past midnight to about 2 a.m. or so. This night in particular was no different. I hopped into bed and drifted off to sleep between 10:30 and 11 p.m. I'm guessing that sometime after midnight, I was woken up to the sound of our family dog. He was barking at the front door. You could hear my sister's keys jingling as she was unlocking it. Not too long after I eventually passed out, I suddenly awoke once more to the doorbell ringing repeatedly. At this point, I was in a total daze and very perplexed as to what was going on. One minute I was in a deep slumber, and the next second in my groggy and agitated state of mind. I was trying to figure out why the hell the doorbell was going off over and over again. For a moment, my brain dismissed it as my sister coming home and just forgetting her keys. But wait, she had already returned home by now. I had heard her come in through the door a while ago. Okay, so then who was actually at the door at 3 a.m.? After it kept going for another minute or so, I heard my mom storming down the hall, our anxious dog scrambling to get to the door. I poked my head out of my bedroom to see who it was. Before she was close to opening it though, she stopped. She felt something was off about the situation. My sister threw her bedroom door open. She was also very irritated. She paused to look at me standing at my door and confirmed to herself that I wasn't the culprit. Mind you, all of our bedrooms are upstairs, and so are the speakers for the doorbell. It literally comes from the hallway, so you absolutely can't miss it. She asked who was at the door, to which my mom responded back that she didn't know. She scooped up our dog and quietly ran back down the hall to the master bedroom, where the windows faced the front of the house. She was checking to see if it was my dad, who may have forgotten something and turned back around to grab it. He had just left for work. His car was nowhere in sight, though. Footsteps could then be heard running up and down the stairs that led to the tiny porch where our front door was located. Picture this. You hear frantic ringing of the doorbell. No knocking or pounding at the actual door. A few pauses, then more ringing, then more pauses. Then you hear someone running up and down the stairs. It was just a cycle of that for nearly 20 minutes. It was really weird. I was instructed to bring myself and my cat to the front room, where my mom and sister were huddled, still trying to figure out what the hell was going on. My sister had called 911 to report what was happening, and they were also on the phone with my dad. He had full view and access to the security cameras at our house, and told us there was an Asian woman outside, running over our steps to peer at our doorbell, perhaps to check and see if we had one of those Ring doorbells with a camera embedded into it. She was the one ringing the doorbell frantically. The ringing eventually stopped. The thing we weren't aware of, though, until my dad figured it out in the camera footage, was that the woman was laying down on our front porch off to the side, as if she was waiting for someone to open it up. Perhaps to truly appear as though she needed assistance and wasn't feeling well. Maybe she was readying for a possible attack. It was really odd behavior. At first, we weren't sure if she really needed help or what, but after viewing the cameras, it was clearly obvious she did not and had other intentions in mind. Our neighborhood is pretty safe, and nothing like that had ever occurred as far as we were all aware. The fact that she didn't go out of her way to knock or pound at the door, or even yell out an emergency or go to a neighboring house for help, was very odd. You could see her holding her phone, too. Funnily enough, my dad also said that as he'd pulled out of the driveway to head off to work, he'd seen a suspicious figure dressed in all black, walking from a dark corner of the street towards our home. I'm still not sure to this day why, out of all the houses in my neighborhood, we were targeted specifically. Eventually, she did fortunately give up and go away. My mom made sure to watch her through the windows in the house, though, to see where she went. Lo and behold, from out our sliding glass door, my mom could see her getting into a car waiting in the shadows down the street, where there were no streetlights at all. There was someone already in the vehicle as well, someone who was most likely a getaway driver. They drove off. We had a really close call that night. I don't know what they had planned, but thank God it didn't work. So every night for the past 2 months, between the hours of 2 and 3 a.m., I've been hearing this really weird sound. It sounds like someone pedaling a really old bicycle around my house. There's a road really close by my home, and I live on a corner, so we do hear traffic coming and going, but it's quite rare. I do live somewhat in the middle of nowhere. Because it started happening so often, I began to get more and more curious. I got up one night when I heard the sound of that old bicycle coming and tried to see if I could see what it was from my window. Even though I could clearly hear the sound and my ears were telling me it was right out there in front of my window, I couldn't see what it was at all. As the nights went by, I started to create a picture in my mind of the route this old bicycle was taking. It seemed to approach from a distance on the left turn of the corner, then go down the right side of my house. After that, I couldn't hear it for a while. A couple of minutes later, I'd hear it approach again from the distance on the left. This weird loop or circle went on for roughly an hour. It was the strangest thing. It had been going on for quite a while, and because I could never see what was causing the sound, I began to worry about my own state of mind. I wondered if maybe I was just hearing things. Maybe I was under some real stress that I wasn't aware of. I invited one of my best friends over one night and told him about the sound of the old bicycle. I felt so stupid sharing it out loud. It really sounded like I was having a crazy hallucination or something. Thankfully, my friend did not make fun of me. He listened and was very interested in finding out the source of this noise. He suggested that we wait for the sound to approach, and when it came close enough, to try and get out in front of it and see what happened. I was interested, but I think the beers we had been having had given me some extra confidence. I wanted an end to the mystery of that noise. It was so irritating. I just didn't understand how something unseen could be making so much noise, and I wanted to find out for myself. Having my friend with me was the final push I needed. The one thing I wasn't so sure of was standing in the way of the source of the noise. I didn't think that would be such a good idea. My friend really wanted to do it though, so we waited until 2 a.m. I hoped the noise was going to come like normal, because otherwise I would clearly look very crazy. I almost thought it wasn't going to come at all, but just after 2 a.m. the sound began to approach. We left my house and went out into the dark night. There were crickets chirping, and there was a little breeze blowing through the trees. We stood there, listening to this old bicycle sound approaching, but seeing nothing on the road at all. After a few moments, the sound passed right in front of us, then went down the right-hand side of my home and out of earshot just like always. My friend was amazed by what he'd heard. I was happy that I wasn't losing my mind at least. When that noise went down past my house, to the right area, he asked me what would happen next. I told him the noise would come back soon, coming from the left. He took a couple of strides out into the middle of the road and stood there smiling at me with his hands on his hips. He stood there waiting, and I didn't feel like standing next to him. There was some part of me that didn't want to be there. I'm glad I listened to that part of me. A few moments passed by, and the bicycle sound began to approach from the left again. It slowly approached as usual, and the tension I felt escalated more and more. It gradually arrived to the place where my friend stood. The moment it reached the spot where he was standing, the sound suddenly disappeared altogether. We were both amazed. I was so glad it was gone now. I could sleep through the night peacefully. We both went back inside, quite relieved. I went to bed, but I still didn't know what it was. I really didn't care that much, though. It was gone now. 3 days later, I heard some quite sad news, though. My friend had been hit by a car, broke his right arm and his right leg. It was a serious injury, but thankfully not a life-threatening one. I visited my friend in the hospital, and he said that when the car approached, he was crossing the road. He had enough time to react, but when he got to the center, he felt like his body had turned to stone, and he couldn't move at all. All he could do was watch as the car plowed into him. I don't know if him standing in front of the noise of that mysterious bicycle had something to do with what made him freeze, but he's doing better now. He's out of the hospital. Months have passed since that night he stayed over. The thing is, though, the noise came back. It's really driving me crazy, and I can't sleep at all. It's all I can think about. I tried to go out into the road to see if I could put a stop to the noise, just to get some sleep like my friend had done before. Nothing happened, so I don't know what I'm going to do. When I was in college, I, like most people, didn't have a whole lot of money. During the summertime, I would work a job, and at college, I did have an on-campus job as well. I didn't get that many hours or that much money for it, though. I didn't have time for a normal or even part-time job while I was at school. I had quite a bit of homework, and school was very difficult for me, so I had to spend a lot of time studying during the day. During my junior year, I really wanted to make some more money, though. So I decided to go on Craigslist and look for some fast jobs I could do. I went on one day and looked under the general labor section. Those would be good jobs for me. I was a pretty fit 21-year-old guy. Any kind of job like yard work or something like that was what I was hoping for. Soon, I saw an ad that simply said yard cleanup. Well, that was exactly what I was looking for. I clicked on it. There weren't many details at all, though. It just said, need someone to help clean up my yard. Will take a couple hours and pay $100. The ad had only been posted an hour earlier. I responded, and soon the person got back to me. I agreed to the job, and they asked me if I could come over on Friday night. I asked what time, and they said 9 p.m. This was kind of strange to me. I mean, you'd expect to be doing yard work during the daytime, right? I should have questioned them further and asked why so late at night, but I didn't. I was afraid that if I did, they would get mad and find somebody else. I really needed that money. Plus, I was free at the time, and it's not like I had to go to class the next morning or anything like that. I agreed to it, and they gave me the address. On Friday night, I put the address into my phone and drove down to the location. I'd never been to that area before. It was almost 20 minutes away from my house. The location was a home with a pretty decently sized yard. It was in a residential neighborhood, but I couldn't tell a whole lot about the area. It was nighttime and really dark, and there were only a couple of dimly lit street lamps around. I let the person know I was there, texting them. I got out of my car. I was about 5 minutes early and started walking up to the home. There was a 2-story house that looked pretty average to me. There were some overgrown bushes in the yard, as well as leaves and such. I walked up to the front door and rang the doorbell. All of the lights in the home appeared to be off, which was kind of strange. About a minute went by and nobody came to the door. I knocked on it, thinking that maybe their doorbell might be broken or something. After knocking, I still heard nothing though. I waited and double-checked on my phone that I was at the correct address. Nobody had responded to my earlier text either. I knocked one more time, but still no one came to the door. Then I heard something out in the yard. It sounded like footsteps. They were off to my right, coming from almost the side of the house. I looked over, but it was very dark, and there was a tree obscuring my view. I couldn't see anything. I took a couple steps back. The footsteps were a way away, but clearly in the yard of the property I was at. When I moved back, the footsteps stopped, so I called out, asking if anybody was there. I thought maybe it was the homeowner, but I didn't get any response. I was starting to feel kind of creeped out by this situation. I heard the footsteps start moving again, and I couldn't take it anymore. I started moving away. I didn't look behind me. I walked all the way to my car and jumped inside. I locked the doors and looked out to the yard, but I didn't see anyone there. I checked my phone one last time to see if there had been any response yet. Still nothing. I left and started driving back to my college apartment. When I was still on that quiet street, though, I saw a car appear behind me. I hadn't seen exactly where it had come from, but it looked like it might have actually come out of the driveway of the home I was at. The car followed me off that street and on to the next one. When I got back on the highway to go back to campus, the car did as well. It stayed with me when I took the exit too. By then, I was getting really suspicious. I kept driving, and when I got a mile from campus, the car finally stopped following me. It took a left while I took a right, and I was able to make it back just fine. After that, I decided not to go on Craigslist anymore. I don't know if the car that followed me had anything to do with the ad or not, but I really feel like it did. I just don't have any concrete proof. What I do know is that the experience was very strange, and that the person never attempted to contact me at all after that. I still don't know who was walking behind the tree. They definitely heard me when I called out to them, but they didn't respond. I'm glad I decided to leave when I did. Due to the nature of my job, I never found a serious relationship. I've had some semi-serious flings, but nothing that lasts more than a few months or so. It's one of the few things about my job that I don't really like. While I'm still somewhat young, I'm using this job to travel and see the world. In the 3 years that I've worked here, I've seen just about every major landmark in the United States, and even got to visit some other countries as well. I'm just now getting to the point of my life, though, where I'm trying to settle down. Or maybe I'm just lonely. I don't really know. A few weeks ago, I had to travel to the other side of the country for work. The city that I was staying in was fairly large, and I figured that since I was going to be staying there for a week or so, maybe I could try and find some companionship. A friend of mine told me to check out Tinder. I must have been out of touch, because I thought Tinder only worked for your hometown. I didn't realize it was based on your current location. I set up my app and started swiping, as they say. I worked all day on that afternoon, and when I was checked, I was surprised to see how many matches I actually had. Since it was early enough in the evening, I decided to try my luck and see if I could get someone to go out and grab a drink with me. The first few conversations failed miserably. I then messaged Jen. She seemed like a free spirit and someone I wouldn't mind hanging out with. After a few minutes, I asked her if she wanted to go grab a drink, and she was totally down to meet. We scheduled for 8:30 at some local bar. I talked to one of my friends before meeting her, and he joked around for me to be careful about meeting women online. We both laughed, but I was honestly putting zero stock into this. I was just looking for some company, and then who knows? If we really connected, maybe we could hang out together again. I arrived a few minutes early, and by chance she happened to be arriving at the same time. We both embraced awkwardly outside the bar and had a good chuckle about it. We made our way inside for a drink. The first thing I was happy about was that the woman meeting me was the exact same as the woman in the Tinder profile. I feel like I hear stories all the time of people getting catfished or whatever. So it was nice to see the girl in person that I actually thought I was talking to. A few hours into our date, we were getting along very well, making each other laugh. I don't know, it just felt really good. A few drinks in, and she started to give me those friendly touches on the arm or on the hand. There was something about those soft and delicate touches that made me feel comfortable, that maybe this was developing into something. I had to keep reminding myself that I didn't live here, though, and kept telling myself that I couldn't get in too deep with this girl. I think it's worth noting that at this point of the night, I had zero doubts or red flags about this person. Close to midnight, she leaned over and kissed me on the cheek. As I smiled, she whispered that we should go back to my place. I could feel my heart racing, and I'm not gonna lie, that is what I wanted. I nodded and we caught an Uber back to my Airbnb. Before heading inside, she paused for a moment. I asked if she was okay, and she said in a somewhat embarrassed voice that she'd meet me inside. She said she didn't want me to see, but she was a smoker. She was trying to quit, but it was a long process. I assured her I didn't really care, but she was persistent that I not see her smoking. Not wanting to upset her, I went inside and started getting changed into some comfortable clothes. A few minutes went by, and I noticed she still wasn't inside. I went and looked out the front window, but she was nowhere to be found. I stepped outside and shouted her name a few times. There was no response at all. The house I was renting had this small wraparound porch in front of it. On the porch was a bench, so I sat down and messaged Jen on the Tinder app. While I was waiting for her to respond, I started getting kind of nervous. After all, I didn't know this area that well. I wondered if maybe this wasn't as safe a neighborhood as I thought it was to be in. The thoughts of something horrible having happened to Jen started to flood my mind. I heard some commotion coming from off to the side, so I turned around and looked through the window into my rented house. There she was, clear as day. Jen and two other random dudes. They seemed to be sneaking around inside my home. I instinctually ducked down. I could see Jen whispering something to them, but I couldn't hear what it was through the thick walls. I saw her pull out her phone, and she started to text. Seconds later, I got a message from her saying, "Hey, where'd you go? I'm inside now and I can't find you." I didn't respond. One of the guys stood in the living room, constantly looking around and over their shoulders. The other guy was now not in view, which made me somewhat nervous. Now, I should have called the police right there and then, but in the moment I couldn't think straight at all. I was trying to put puzzle pieces together in my head. After a minute or two, I saw the other guy, who I couldn't see a moment ago. He was carrying a bag of some kind. It looked pretty full. I realized what was happening. I was pretty sure I was getting robbed, or at least the house I was staying at was. I saw the man with the bag head over to my laptop, which was on the desk in the living room. My entire life was on that laptop. I watched him follow the wire from the back of the wall, and then he unplugged it. I couldn't let him steal that. I messaged Jen back and said that I'd called the police and they'd be there in less than 30 seconds. Obviously, that was a lie. I hadn't even called them at all yet. I wanted to see how she'd react, though. She screamed at them, saying that they had to go or something. The three of them ran out the front of the door, running directly at me. Thankfully, they couldn't see that I was crouching over in the corner, behind the bench. I sprinted inside and saw my laptop was still there. My wallet was also right next to it, which contained all my credit cards and about $500 in cash. Luckily for me, this thief was either an idiot or completely blind. I called the police and told them everything that happened. No surprise, that Jen person was completely fake. We contacted the owners and tried to figure out what they'd stolen. Didn't look like anything too valuable, though. Maybe some random pieces of art or silverware. I don't even know. They were all just from Home Goods or TJ Maxx or something, so they weren't really valuable things anyway. I stayed at a hotel for the rest of my stay and completely deleted my Tinder account. What disturbs me the most is that this woman is still out there, tricking people into letting her into their homes and robbing them. My sincerest hope is that I never interact with her again, and that I never have to return to that city for work or for any other reason. This story happened almost 15 years ago, when I was about 20 years old. And although this occurred when I was quite young, the images from this experience are permanently planted in my mind. A few of the details are hazy now, but to give some background, my family and I lived in a nice suburban neighborhood, about an hour outside of Chicago. On this particular day, I would be in the care of my then 15-year-old sister, and her best friend as well. My mother would be running to the store. She gave us the normal safety talk, and made it clear we were not to go outside. She then departed, and my sister and her friend, not even 5 minutes later, suggested we go on a walk around the neighborhood. I distinctly remember my sister opening the garage door, seating me in my bright pink kid's Jeep, and beginning our walk around the neighborhood. We lived in a safe and primarily retired community, that kind of neighborhood. We began going around the block, with my sister and her friend obviously having a blast. They were getting a thrill out of their rebellious behavior as they saw it. I remember that as we turned the street and continued through the neighborhood, we made it about a quarter of the way down when we saw an older woman walking towards us. She was about a football field length in front of us. We all stopped dead in our tracks as we noticed she was wearing an odd, long tan coat. My sister and her friend gave each other a look, and we sat there in place. The woman, being ahead of us, held all of our attention. After only a few seconds since noticing her, She realized that we could see her. In turn, within less than a minute of catching her gaze, she began charging at us, yelling at us down the sidewalk. My sister grabbed my pink Jeep and her friend, and then held me in her arms as we ran through the backyards, being chased by this woman. We made it back to our backyard and ran inside through our French doors. As quickly as we could, we immediately locked the set and scrambled inside. We heard a large bang and then turned to see a tall, large man with broad shoulders hitting the back door, staring at us and looking upset. This is the point in time where my memory turns hazy. I don't remember what happened after, but I do remember my sister calling the cops and my mom returning home and scolding my sister and her friends. When the cops arrived, the man was already gone, and my mom blamed the two for liking to start drama, being that they were teenage girls and all. This happened over a decade ago, and we to this day don't know what happened to those two. We don't know who they were either, as no arrests were ever made. My sister and I are still close, but we haven't talked about that experience in years. I can't forget that vivid memory I have, though, of us being chased and genuinely thinking we were doomed if we hadn't locked the door just in time. Jeez, that was a really horrifying experience. This happened to a housemaid and I a few years back. We all lived in one big house with separate bedsits and shared kitchens and bathrooms. One of the guys was super racist to this poor black kid, who I'll call A, that lived on the ground floor. A was a lovely guy, learning to be a doctor in my city. The abuse from this old white guy, who I'll call B, culminated over the course of a few months. One day, I noticed they were having a screaming match, or more accurately, B had started screaming abuse and A had dared to argue back. At that point, B stormed off upstairs to his room. I went downstairs to make sure A was alright and was chatting with him when B suddenly barreled down the staircase, crowbar in hand, and started trying to smash the back of A's head. He was stood at the bottom of the stairs. I managed to jump in the way and started a struggle with the man. Somehow, I managed to wrangle it off the guy. I can't even remember how. That's how intense it was. I backed into a corner as he began trying to attack me. I managed to get a swing in with the crowbar and hit him in the face. I called the police after he fled and dissolved into panic-ridden bawling, holding the crowbar behind myself until the police arrived and arrested the bastard. Thankfully, I was okay and only got minor injuries. B got jailed for a spell. I moved out of the house soon after A did, and out of the city entirely not long after that. Seeing B out and around the town free after he got released gave me panic attacks, and I felt like I couldn't stay there anymore. I feel so much better having a flat of my own these days. This happened when I started living alone. It wasn't long after I got my apartment. Man, I really loved that apartment. I can still remember the layout of the place even to this day. Anyway, I remember I woke up in the middle of the night and had the sudden urge to use the restroom. I got up. It was somewhat weird though, because for some reason I felt like I was being led, if that makes any sense. What I mean by that is I usually get up and swing my legs off the bed, then take a couple minutes rubbing my eyes or checking my phone or whatever. When I got up that night, I found my feet immediately, and as soon as they touched the hardwood floor, I started going to the bathroom, almost as if I was having a disembodied experience. I headed in there, shut the door, and hit the lights. As soon as I hit them, they went out, and the bulb needed replacing. Suddenly, I was reminded of all the creepy and weird stuff I'd been reading online. I'm not ashamed to say I was beginning to freak out a little. Yeah, I felt a shudder caress my shoulder blades. Naturally, I began to panic and immediately tried to get out of the dark bathroom. I checked my weight against the door and was fumbling for the lock in the dark, but the door refused to open. My bathroom lock was a bit weird in that you kind of had to push and twist it to get it open. So as much as it seems like I was overreacting, I wasn't. It was just one of those things that if you panicked, you couldn't work it right. At this stage, I was still new to my apartment, and I was groggy as hell. Just as I was thinking, I was getting worked up to a point where I couldn't go back. Something else happened. I heard someone whisper right in my ear. It was a voice saying something like, "Get out." I know that sounds so cliche, but I actually started to cry in fear. I was a young woman living all alone, and I didn't understand what was happening right now. I really didn't know what else to do. You might act like I should have, and say you would have done the perfect thing if it happened to you, but I was too scared. There were too many tears, and lots of pushing and pulling with the door. I wanted nothing but to get out of my bathroom and rush back to my bedroom and jump straight into my bed. I could see myself turning on all the lights, rummaging around to find my TV's remote control, and surrounding myself with light and noise. I imagined that after a while, the noises of everyday life would make me forget about whatever was in the bathroom with me, because I felt like I was certain I was not alone. While I was imagining escaping the bathroom, I managed to fumble the lock open. I readied myself to shoulder barge the door open. The moment after I heard the lock click, the door popped open slightly and slid into its natural position, as if it were naturally left open a few inches. As the door swung outward, I could see there was something in the gap, even though the light of my bathroom was out and there was no other light in my apartment. I knew there was something there on the other side of the bathroom door. Whatever it was right in front of me. All the intentions I had of leaving the bathroom went away instantly. There was a shadow out there, and I didn't want to be anywhere near it. For a split second, I swore I could see the gleam of whites of someone's eyes. I keep saying it because I know that whatever that thing was, it wasn't anything like me. Didn't feel human, at least. All I can explain is that I thought for certain it was not just a home invader. I was certain it was some sort of supernatural entity. In the quiet of the middle of the night and darkness, I summoned the courage to draw myself toward the gap in the door. I felt this strong urge to look out and see if I could notice anything further. I didn't see anything at first, and the figure appeared to have disappeared. I should have accepted that as a blessing in disguise, but I couldn't pull myself away from the gap in the bathroom door. I saw a jet black shadowy figure moving in an amazingly fluid way. It was there. I saw whatever it was at close range. Don't ask me to explain what it was, because I don't really have the words. All I can say is that it looked like a shadow person or something. I slammed the bathroom door closed, me now trapped in the bathroom, the place I so desperately wanted to escape just moments ago. Well, it had now become a safe space for me. I locked the door. I don't care if you call me crazy, but I ended up spending the night in my bathroom, curled up in the fetal position. I tried to get as much sleep as I could. As soon as I could see the morning light filtering in through the gaps in the door, I managed to gather the courage to leave the bathroom. I went to my parents' house after that, and I've been like a parasite since that day to them. I just get so weirded out when I'm home alone. I don't like that feeling, or the possibility of encountering whatever that was again. I don't know if I can bring myself to live alone again for a long while. I live in a fairly small and quiet town, all by myself, a little bit out in the country. The story I'm about to tell you about happened a few months ago. One night I was sleeping when I was woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning. I remember that as I woke up, I could hear my phone vibrating on the nightstand next to me. I ignored it and just tried to go back to sleep, but whoever was calling me called again and again. After the third or fourth call, I finally woke up completely. At that point, I had been kind of half asleep and wanting to go back to bed. I hadn't yet really realized how strange it was to be receiving so many random phone calls at this hour. I looked at the phone, and it simply said it was an unknown number. This was really odd. Now that I was awake, I could tell that whoever this was really wanted me to answer. I accepted the call and said hello. At first, I heard nothing on the other end. Then I began to hear the sounds of heavy breathing. It was very deliberate. I asked who it was multiple times, but all I got in response was the breathing noises. This had to be a joke. How else could I explain this? I was pretty sure that was the case at least. I mean, who calls someone up at 2 o'clock in the morning and just breathes on the other end? They'd probably found some way to not make their number show and were playing a prank on me. I said something like, "Haha, very funny," then hung up on them. I went back to sleep, and to my surprise, they actually did not call me for the rest of the night. I woke up the next morning for work at my normal time. It was about 7 a.m. or so. After getting up, I went to my kitchen. My kitchen is kind of at the front of the house, and that's when I noticed something on my front window. There was a post-it note, and it was sticking on the outside. I found this really odd. Obviously, that hadn't been there the night before. It was in obvious view of anybody who would have been looking, and somebody had to have put it there recently. I walked outside and plucked it off the window. There was writing in pen on the sticky note, which simply said, "Call me back." I got the chills when I read that. Obviously, I connected it to that call previously that I'd gotten at 2 o'clock in the morning. This was really strange. I don't live in a city where there are tons of people around. Like I said, I'm a little more out in the countryside, and the houses are spread very far apart. I can barely even see my neighbor's home when I'm in my driveway. My driveway is really long too, so for somebody to be on my property, which had multiple no trespassing signs on it, this was really bizarre. I went to the police that day, just letting them know what happened. I didn't really feel like I was in danger yet, but I thought I should let them know about the situation because of how suspicious it was. It's a quiet town, you know, and these things don't happen very often. It very well could have been some guy in the neighborhood pulling a prank, but I'd never had any pranks pulled on me like that before. I couldn't really think of anybody who would do something like that to me either. I did receive strange phone calls one more time, but today it still remains a mystery as to who it was, and I haven't received any more strange calls since then. Taking a vacation and visiting cool and exotic places is really awesome, if you can afford it, of course. Unfortunately, when I was in my late 20s, I could not afford such a luxury. I worked 40 to 50 hours a week to basically just pay my bills. I know that's scary enough in itself, but that's not the story I'm about to share. Instead of spending money I didn't have to travel somewhere else, I decided to use my first ever paid vacation from work to have what they call a staycation. If anyone isn't familiar with that word, it's exactly like what it sounds really, a vacation where you just stay at home. I planned on using this extra time to actually catch up on some housework. For the record, I rent this house, and I don't own it. I would get all my cleaning and laundry done, and would catch up on some shows I had been neglecting, maybe even play some video games, and catch up with friends I hadn't seen in months. That all sounded so good to me, but better than anything else was the fact I didn't have to wake up at 4:30 in the morning to go to work for an entire week. The first few days, I'll admit, I didn't really do anything at all. It was glorious, actually. On Wednesday or Thursday, I don't remember exactly why, but I noticed a bunch of teenagers outside my house. It was in the early evening. I was a teenager once, so honestly I didn't really care if they were just kind of lingering outside, just as long as they weren't messing with any of my stuff. Couldn't care less, really. I was getting ready to leave at around 7:30 to meet some friends for drinks. As I was leaving, I noticed the teens were still outside, just doing their own thing. It was at least 10 kids if I remember correctly. As I was backing out of my driveway, I noticed a few of the kids now standing at the bottom of it. I rolled down my window and very nicely asked if they could move for a second so I could get out and leave. Well, apparently, this question was way out of line. One of the kids marched right up to my car and yelled at the top of his lungs. He said they were not going to let me leave. All the kids started laughing, and I just started to feel annoyed. My mood was starting to shift less polite now. "Come on, guys, can you just move over for a second?" They all started to laugh again. Sounded like a bunch of coyotes cackling, really. The same little punk that spoke last time spoke again, and said in a mocking voice, "No, us guys cannot just move." The laughter spread amongst all the teens. I realized I was getting older when I resorted to simply saying, "Okay, well, I'll just call the cops then, and see what they do about this." The punk kid just stared at me with this horrible look. One of the other boys shouted from the back and said, "Yo, man, let's just get out of here." Within seconds, the whole group had dispersed, but the last one to leave was that punk kid who had been mocking me. He blew me a kiss as he ran off with his friends, and they peeled out of there. I was insanely annoyed, but I was happy the whole ordeal was over. That night at the bar, I was telling my friends about the encounter, and they all sort of groaned. They proceeded to tell me how much they hated the teenagers around that area. All I could think about was that one song Teenagers by My Chemical Romance. We all hung out for a little while, and then I decided to head home. It was around midnight or so. Once I was home, I started getting ready for bed when my doorbell suddenly rang. I stood still for a moment, trying to think if there was any reason why my doorbell would be ringing at this hour. I thought maybe it was one of my friends, but that didn't make much sense. They would have called or texted me. Seconds later, the doorbell rang again. I had all the lights off downstairs, so I felt comfortable sneaking around, knowing that whoever was out there wouldn't be able to see me. I looked out the window of the living room, and standing there on my doorstep in the middle of the night was that kid from earlier, along with two others. My first instinct was to go out there and give them a piece of my mind. But that's when I noticed one of the teenagers was standing there holding a bat behind his back. If this kid had a bat, then the other two must have had something as well. I didn't feel like getting jumped by a bunch of kids, and I did the only thing I could think of at that moment. I just called the police. I'd let them deal with this issue, standing right on the other side of the door. I called the police and left the line on speakerphone as I informed the dispatcher of what was going on. My logic was that these goons would hear me calling the police and flee, knowing that I meant business. I could not have been more wrong. Once I hung up with dispatch, the kids started going nuts, claiming I was a coward and a few other choice words. All three of them started to bang on my door with the bats they were carrying. That punk kid from earlier took his bat and used it like a pool stick, drove it right through the window of my door. Thankfully, the police showed up right after that, and I saw those kids flee into the night. The cops weren't able to apprehend them, so I just gave them my statement and told the officers a description of those teens, the ones I remembered seeing at least. They told me they would be on the lookout for them, and that they would handle it. I'm not sure if they really did handle it, or if the kids just never came back, because after that night I never saw them again. I always wondered though, what were they planning for that night? Did they just want to scare me, or were they truly some evil kids? Truthfully, I'm happy I don't know that answer. I only stayed at that house for another 5 months before I eventually moved out. I consider myself lucky that in those months, I never saw those teenagers in my area ever again. When I was in high school, I lived in a small town in Lynchburg, Ohio. It's one of those towns where everyone knows everyone. Back then, we didn't have all the cool stuff kids have nowadays, so we would always be outside doing something. Like I said, small town, with not much to do. One night, I decided to sneak out with my boyfriend for a late-night drive on a back road called Stoned Road. It's where all the kids would get together, hang out, and smoke some weed. We'd all just talk, and after a bit, we'd go our separate ways. My boyfriend was driving, and I was in the passenger seat. My 2 friends were in the back seat as well, and we were heading back to town now. These roads have woods on both sides and are very dark and curvy. They're not traveled very often, which is what makes it such a good place to do those activities. As we were heading back to town, we rounded a sharp curve when on the right side of the road, out in the middle of nowhere, we saw a fire and 10 to 15 people around it. They had these crazy, scary big masks on, and they were all in black clothing, chanting. As we were going by, we were just staring at them. They stopped their chanting and stared right back at us. Their heads followed us from the time we saw them until we couldn't see them anymore. I yelled at my boyfriend to step on the gas and get the hell out of there. It was just so scary. We didn't see any other cars or anything out there anywhere, and there were no houses nearby either. We were just talking about how freaky that all was and debated on whether or not we should turn back around and see what was going on there. Maybe we could find out more about what they were doing. Somehow, I actually managed to talk my boyfriend into turning back around and going back. I really wish I didn't. As we were driving back, we were now looking for them, but we didn't see them anywhere. The fire had been put out too. We knew that we weren't tripping, but we couldn't figure out how they just disappeared like that. We drove down a bit more, knowing we'd already passed the area. We turned back around, and we're all just talking, saying how crazy that had all been, when all of a sudden my boyfriend slammed on the brakes. I looked ahead to see what was going on, thinking maybe there was a deer there. It was one of those freaky people in the masks, standing in the road, carrying a large stick with something red all over it. He also had it on his mask too. He had his hands up, telling us to stop. The man in the mask started walking up to my window. I screamed at my boyfriend to keep driving. All of a sudden, the guy smacked my window so hard it left a crack in it. He began to yell at me. "What did you see? What did you see?" He started chasing us as we began to drive off. The rest of them were nowhere to be seen. After a few minutes, we were finally thinking we were out of there, when suddenly 2 cars came flying up behind us. They had their bright lights on and were honking their horns at us repeatedly. We fled until we arrived at the middle of town and didn't stop until we got all the way back to my house, making sure they didn't follow us all the way in the process. We have no clue what they were doing or what we witnessed, but they were obviously doing something they didn't want us to see. I was so terrified to sleep that night, but thankfully nothing else happened. We still did go to Stoned Road just to smoke, just not so much after dark anymore. We definitely didn't go if it was too late. I can't explain exactly what it was that we had seen that night. I just know I'm glad we got away and never saw those people again. People can be so crazy, so be safe out there and watch out if you ever travel on dark back roads. In the middle of the night, you might actually see something you would never want to. I'm going to tell you a horrifying story of the next door neighbor I used to have. I live in a single-family home with my wife and our dog Sparky in a residential neighborhood. There are quite a few different houses on our street, and we have 1 acre of land, as do most of our neighbors. We've lived here for 5 years now, ever since getting married. Our next-door neighbor had been quite a jerk since the very day we moved in. He had been nothing short of a nightmare, and started living next door to us about a year after we'd arrived. His name was Dan. I know that he was recently divorced, and I understand that can be hard. It's okay to be going through a difficult time, but that was no excuse for his behavior. I'm only guessing that that's what caused him to act the way he did. To give some examples, I would say most houses on our street are pretty nice and well maintained. They're not all that large, but the grass is green and mowed frequently. Most people have a nice landscape and flowers. The first time I talked to Dan, he insulted our home, saying we should replace all the flowers because they were so ugly. He also made bad comments about my car, a Ford Fusion, saying it was terrible. He wasn't joking either, like my wife thought at first. He was dead serious. She soon found out for herself when she was outside in the backyard once. She said he told her our house was the ugliest on the block and began to harass her as well. When I went outside, I saw him standing in his backyard seemingly drunk off his ass, telling me to fuck off. After these first few interactions, I tried to stay away from Dan. The next time I talked to him was a month later, when he came over to tell us that we needed to keep our dog inside at all times. We would sometimes have Sparky out in the front yard or backyard on a leash. The leash would be attached to a stake in the ground. We didn't have a fence around our property at all, but Sparky's leash was not even nearly long enough to come close to reaching past the property line. Dan claimed that he hated dogs and did not want to have to see it in our front yard. I basically took my turn and told him to fuck off. He walked away angry as hell, and after that we didn't interact. He still made his presence known though. He would start leaving his stuff on their property. There were no fences, but there were pretty obvious property lines. Anybody with common sense will be able to tell you where it changed, from our yard to Dan's. He would just leave his old junk in our yard. One day I'd had enough and moved these things over about 10 feet until they were back on his property. I was thinking of even having a fence put up because of him. I didn't want to let him win. The very next day, my wife came inside in the evening and told me that Sparky was missing. He had been out in the yard on his leash like he often was. The leash was still there, as was his collar, but he was gone. We thought he'd somehow slipped out of his collar. Dogs can do that sometimes. I didn't know how else it could be explained. I took to the streets and started searching all around the neighborhood for Sparky. We went to several neighbors' houses and asked them if they had seen him at all. Nobody had. We were worried like crazy and didn't know how this could have happened. For hours we searched the area until about 9 p.m. When we got back home, I went into the backyard as my wife went inside to call more neighbors and ask them. That's when I heard a faint bark. I thought maybe it was a neighbor's dog at first, but I had this feeling it was Sparky. I walked over to where I'd heard it, which happened to be in Dan's backyard. I called out Sparky's name and heard the barking again. I ran over and heard that it was coming from inside Dan's shed. I tried opening it, but there was a large lock on it. I couldn't get it open. I ran to Dan's house and pounded on his front door like crazy. He didn't answer though. I was knocking on his door for 5 minutes without a response. After that, I called the police. When they arrived, they heard Sparky barking from inside the shed. A short time later, they were finally able to open it. Sure enough, he was inside. We pressed charges. He didn't get that heavy of a penalty though. I think he got probation. He had to move out of the neighborhood as well, which I was really glad to see. I'm hoping that I never see him again. This happened when I was a kid. During that time, I lived with my family. in a 2-story home on a typical residential street. For some reason, I had always thought that our next-door neighbor was really creepy. I didn't have a good reason why, though, because I was just a kid, and I never really interacted with him or anything. Heck, I didn't even really see him that often. I didn't really want to, though. The guy was short, sort of thin, and didn't go outside very much. He also didn't seem that friendly. I really didn't know a whole lot about him. All I knew was that he gave me a real bad feeling. Well, one night, my brother was at his friend's house, and my parents went grocery shopping. I was about 12 and was home alone doing some homework. I know that I had quite a lot that night, or else I would have gone with my parents to the store. It was dark out, and I was in my bedroom on the second floor. Probably about 30 minutes after my parents had left, there was a sudden knock at the front door. Immediately, something about this seemed off to me. It was 8 p.m. and quite dark out. Who would be knocking at this time? I knew for a fact that we weren't expecting anyone. I sat there in my room, thinking of the possibilities. They began to knock again. I left my bedroom and walked over to my brother's bedroom. There was a view of the front door from there. When I went over to his window and peeked out, I saw the next-door neighbor. The guy was standing right there on the front step. What could he want? I didn't know. What I did know was that I was obviously not going to open up the door for him. I stayed where I was and watched him. He was just standing there, looking around. I saw him press his face up against the window. Then he stepped back and casually started walking away. He cut through the grass back towards his yard. I thought that he would be gone then, and I started to feel better. I returned to my bedroom, only to be interrupted about a minute later. I heard what sounded like somebody at the back door. I could kind of see this area from my bedroom window, so I looked out to see what was going on. I saw him trying to open the back door. Thankfully, it was all locked up. He stayed at the door for a while before finally walking away. I was really scared. This guy had actually tried entering our home. I had been right to think he was creepy. After a few minutes went by, I went downstairs to make sure he was gone. When I got down there, as soon as I entered the dining room, I saw him looking in through the window. He looked right at me and then slipped out of sight. That was a really scary moment for me. I turned and ran all the way back upstairs. I had no cell phone back then, so I had to go back downstairs to make a call. For several minutes, I was too scared, until finally I got the courage to leave my bedroom. I went back downstairs and called my parents, who were luckily already on their way home. When they got home, I told them all about it. My dad went over to talk to the neighbor, but he didn't answer the door. We considered calling the police, but did not in the end. We should have, but the next day my dad went back to the guy's house. This time he did answer and denied everything. After that, I was terrified of him. I didn't want to be left home by myself. My family and I ended up moving from that house across town less than a year after this. We didn't move because of the man, though. It was because of my dad's work. I'm just glad we moved away from him. I'm not sure why he tried to get into our house, but I'm really glad that he was not able to. I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment. I live on the first floor, and this is something that happened not too long ago. In fact, it was just a few weeks ago, and is still very fresh in my mind. I lived in this apartment building for a little over a year. Even though I've lived here for a while, though, I really don't know many of my neighbors. I know a couple, but most of the people here kind of keep to themselves. Everyone I've interacted with has been very nice, though. The building is pretty large, and I'm not sure exactly how many people live here, but I assume it's quite a lot. One night, I was by myself, watching a movie. It was pretty late at night, around 11 p.m. or so. I was in the living room on the couch when out of nowhere, there was a knock at my front door. I wondered who could be knocking on my door so late at night. I paused the movie and got up from the couch. When I got to the front door, I checked. My next-door neighbor was there. I recognized him. I really didn't know him all that well, but I had said hi to him in the hallways once or twice. I unlocked the door and was about to open it to see what he needed. I had no reason to think anything suspicious of him. As soon as I unlocked the door, though, I heard him walking away quickly. By the time I managed to open it, he'd already disappeared. I even heard his door slamming closed moments later. I didn't see him, though. I just shook my head and went back to my living room. That was very strange, but whatever. Maybe 20 minutes later, though, it happened again. I was sitting on the couch when I heard a knock on the door. I walked over faster this time, but when I got there and looked out the peephole, I could see him running away before I even tried opening it. Now, this was really odd. I didn't know what he was doing. For the rest of the night, he did not come back. The next morning, as I was leaving my apartment to go to work, I had the thought to ask him what the deal was. I stopped at his door and knocked, and he did answer. He was really friendly and seemed completely normal. I told him about the night before and asked him what was going on. He acted all confused and said he had no idea what I was talking about. I told him I was sure I had seen him, but he still denied it and said it must have been somebody that looked like him or something. I wasn't really buying this. I just agreed with him to be nice and then left. I got back from work that afternoon, and things were pretty normal for the rest of the day. Fast forward to that night, though. I went out onto my balcony just to briefly see how the weather was. I wasn't out there for very long and went back inside. We had balconies on the first floor, but they're about 2 feet above the ground. It's the same layout as the people's balconies up on the second and third floor, just not very high up at all. Makes it so everybody can have a little outdoor space that's the same. After I went inside, I was in my bedroom when I suddenly heard my sliding door from the balcony opening. I first went toward the noise and looked out to the living room. I saw my next-door neighbor entering my apartment. I ran to my bedroom door and closed it. I locked it as well. Moments later, he arrived and tried to open it. I wasted no time. I got out my cell phone and called the police. I yelled at him that I was phoning them, but to my surprise, he still tried to open the door. He even began throwing his whole body weight against it a few times as well, but said nothing to me. After a few tries, I heard him give up and start walking away. He was gone. The police showed up a while after that, and I reported the whole thing. At first, my neighbor tried to deny it, but there were security cameras outside which proved his guilt. I'm really glad the cameras were there. I haven't had to worry about him since, and he's not allowed to go near me. I still live in my apartment, but always make sure to lock the balcony door. This happened about 11 years ago, back when I'd just broken up with a girlfriend of mine. Let's call her Y. About a week after our breakup, I started to get these strange texts from an unknown number. Let me just sum up the very first message they sent me. Hi, this is T. I'm someone that works with Y. I've heard that you dated her before, and I'm quite infatuated with her. I'm wondering if maybe you could give me some advice or something? My first reaction was, what the hell? Who the hell does that? Why would this guy even know my number or about my relationship at all? And why text me randomly with such a creepy vibe? It was actually a bit longer than my summary. It was much more in-depth about his love for my recent ex. I thought about just ignoring it, but by that point I had a couple beers on board, so I decided to reply. Honestly, I found it kind of funny in a way. I said something like, I haven't been in touch with Y, but you know that this might not be the best timing. Still, if you like her that much, I guess it's up to you. Let her know however you want to." I got a reply about an hour later. Thank you very much for your encouragement. I'm so grateful. I'll do my best." As you might have guessed, I didn't reply to that one. From then on, I got a text from this random guy every single day. It was always so cringy as well. "Thank you so much for your words of encouragement. They really give me the strength and courage I need to step up." I didn't reply to any of these sorts of texts, obviously, but this guy would text me even if I never replied. It was always telling me this ongoing story. "I summoned the strength to speak to her at work today. We had a big talk. It was really great." Another one came through after. "She bumped into me on the way to work. It was so great, my friend. We talked about all sorts of stuff besides work." I didn't really need to know all this stuff, and this guy just sounded kind of weird. There was something strange about the way he was phrasing these things. Again, I didn't reply. I can't lie, it was sort of intriguing for a while to get daily reports of some random guy's life. It was around this point when the context of these texts changed abruptly, though. Why doesn't Y notice how I feel about her? She must have loads of boyfriends or guy friends or whatever. So why does she never pay attention to me? Why do they always laugh at me when I try to speak to her? God, I hate girls with loads of male friends. Shit, I thought. What have I gotten myself into? I should have told this guy to leave me alone ages ago. Before I could even think of what to do, he sent me another text. "I just thought of a great idea, my friend. I'm gonna get some guys together and have them attack her on the way home from work tonight, and then I'll jump in and save her. That'll really get her attention on me, won't it?" The way me and Y ended things was bad, don't get me wrong. But that still didn't mean I wanted some weird guy to stalk and obsess about her or get some people to fucking attack her. I had to let her know what was going on. I sent her a text and explained everything about her coworker's plans for her after the night shift, about everything else he'd said too. I even offered to come pick her up and take her home. The reply was unexpected to say the least. "The guy you're talking about doesn't work here. I don't have any male coworkers. The only male coworker I have is the owner of the store. Hey, don't worry about it. I'm leaving with some friends tonight and there are some police nearby anyway, so I'm sure it'll be fine." It was quite a relieving message, if not a bit cold. I was glad she would be safe, but the guy who was emailing me was genuinely making my skin crawl now. If he didn't even work with her, how did he know all this stuff about me and her? I sent him a text. "Hey, look you creep, I told Y about your little plan, so don't lay a finger on her. Got it?" He didn't reply. When it started to get dark outside, I started to get a bit twitchy. I was thinking of my ex working the night shift. I was also thinking of that weird guy. I was worried that something bad was going to happen. I checked my phone over and over to see if he'd replied, but the rain had started to fall. It soon passed 11 p.m., his proposed time of attack when she was supposed to be getting off work. My phone was still silent. Nothing from him or my ex. I began to relax when suddenly I got a call from my ex. I answered it immediately. She was crying and in a panic. Whoa, what's going on?" "I'm on my way home and I'm by the station. A guy has been following me the whole time." Now I was in a panic too. I'm too scared to look behind me. The line then abruptly cut. My doorbell rang. My heart was racing. I ran to the peephole. It was my ex at the door. I quickly opened it and let her in. She lived around the same area as me, so I guess that's why she immediately came to my house. She was as white as a ghost and was crying, covered in rainwater. She told me to lock the door immediately. "Did the person following you see you go into my apartment?" I asked. "I don't know, I guess so, maybe. He was right behind me when I got here." I ran out to my balcony and looked outside. There was no sign of anyone out there. I grabbed my phone and called T's number. They picked up right away. I'm calling the police. I have all the proof I need to show them. If you try anything stupid tonight, you'll regret it. I couldn't hear a single word in response, just the sound of the rain crashing down in the background and heavy breathing on the other end. Then the line cut. I knew that he must be out there somewhere in the rain. I know I should have contacted the police sooner, but when you're so young, it's the last thing you want to do. I was also a bit of a dick and troublemaker when I was that age, so I was scared of getting in trouble with the police. I sat with Y and kept her company all night. I convinced her to go to work the next day and to be ready to go to the police if anything strange happened. We shot nervous glances at the door all night while the rain lashed at the windows. I was expecting to hear something outside or the doorbell ringing at any moment, but thankfully the whole night passed by without further incident. The next day, I got a huge text. It went something like this. I'm truly sorry. I don't actually work with your ex. I went to her shop and saw her there and fell in love at first sight. A couple days later, I was at a local restaurant and I saw her there with her friends. They were talking about that recent breakup you guys had. She didn't seem to be very fazed by it. They were all drinking and they got up to go to the bathroom, so I took my chance. I went over and I went into her phone and I grabbed your number. I'm sorry for everything I did. After this weird confession, nothing happened. I didn't hear from T again. Nor did Y either. I don't know the guy's true identity or even what he looked like, so I couldn't do anything about him. I couldn't report him. I couldn't warn anybody about his behavior for the future. All I could do was give the number to the police. I did, of course, but nothing came of it. This didn't impact me as much as it did Y, but so far it's the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me. So, to T, on behalf of myself and Y, I hope we never interact with each other again. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. I know it's been quite a while since I did an outro. If you guys like this video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback about the video itself, please be sure to leave it in the comments below. I always do read the comments, although with me recording every day, I don't have as much time to respond to them anymore. If you guys have a story you would like to send in yourselves, please be sure to look in the description below the video. There will be links to my Facebook, Twitter, and Gmail accounts. You can go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to your story as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is, the type of story if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. Also, please be sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with and as much correct grammar as possible to ensure the best chances of your story appearing in a video. I think that's about it for this video here. Let me know if you guys have any thoughts about the channel or anything, and thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys have a great day.